Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for ADramOfOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is podcast episode 121, and we're in week 7 of the Drums of Autumn read-along. Welcome back. We're in Drums of Autumn, week 7, chapters 11 and 12. I'm calling this episode of Cruelty and Kindness, and the summary goes something like this. A big party is planned. Fergus goes to Jamaica to await the birth of his child. There's an altercation between a slave and the overseer. Jamie, Claire, and Farquard Campbell head to the sawmill. The overseer is injured but alive. The slave is hanging by a hook above the platform. Remarkably, he's alive and not in mortal danger from his wounds. The laws of North Carolina state if a slave draws the blood of a white man, he is to be killed. Claire takes matters into her own hands. Jocasta declares the party must go on. Claire is fitted and fussed over. Jamie is gussied up too. Jamie needs a distraction. Unexpectedly, Claire successfully performs hernia surgery in the salon. The alcohol flows. Inside the chapters. Chapter 11, The Law of Bloodshed, July 1767. I tried to research the Law of Bloodshed. I couldn't find anything that specifically was called this in the colonies. It's part of the Bible, and I found many references there, but I couldn't find out what it was actually called during colonial rule in North Carolina. Essentially, like I said before, if a slave draws blood of a white man or woman, then he is to be summarily killed. So this is a pretty heavy chapter in parts. And you're going to see ethical and moral struggle against the legalities of the time and the sensibilities. This is where it's terrifically difficult for Claire. The last podcast had much to do with Jamie and Jocasta, and really what Jocasta's expectations and needs of Jamie were and are. This set of chapters focuses much on Claire and her place at River Run and in the 18th century. She is terribly uncomfortable with Jocasta owning slaves. She does her very best to do everything for herself and asking the least amount from them at any time. It turns out the Simples room at River Run was stocked poorly and was also being underutilized. I looked up Simples room, but I couldn't find an absolute definition, but essentially it's a room that has medicinals, herbs, etc. in it. And so I put in a link to 18th century medicine that you might find in colonial America. And Jocasta gives Claire her blessing to use it because nobody else is, and Jocasta never really got good at the medicines. That's not where her abilities lie. During their chat, Claire was trying to learn how to spin wool. She's definitely not a natural at it. And Jamie spent his time going over all the books and learning from Jocasta's butler, Ulysses. Ulysses had been overseeing her accounts since Hector's death, but since he wasn't a white man, he couldn't formally take over for her. He had no say, even though he was pretty good at doing all the accounts and everything else. He could never interact with the white men who ran everything else. Jamie easily steps into the role of overseeing the plantation operations. It seems that he showed up at just the right time for what Jocasta needed. It's so serendipitous. Jocasta decides she needs to throw a party to introduce Jamie and Claire to the local society people. Jamie doesn't see the need. He's met nearly all the men of importance in the area, but come to think of it, Claire hasn't met the influential ladies yet. And Claire admits to wanting to meet more people. I wouldn't mind knowing a few more people, I admitted. Not that I don't find ample occupation here, I assured Jocasta, but But not of a sort that interests you, she answered, though with enough of a smile to take the sting out of the remark. You've no great fondness for needlework, I think. Her hand went to the big basket of coloured wools and plucked out a ball of green to be attached to the shawl she was knitting. Aye, well, not that sort of needlework, Jamie put in, closing his book and smiling at me. It's more the stitching of severed flesh that appeals to Claire. I expect she'll be getting restless these days with no more than a cracked heed or a case of piles to be dealing with. Oh, and piles, if you don't know what they are, they're mentioned throughout the Outlander books. They are hemorrhoids. So poor Claire just gets to deal with a bunch of assholes. Claire was getting restless with so little doctoring to do there. This made her think of Marcelie and her impending delivery. Fergus had just left, headed to Jamaica to be with her. He planned to return in the springtime with her and the child. So it's July, so it's the beginning of summer, and Fergus might not be back until the end of March or April, so he could be gone for 10 months. It's quite a long time. But with the weather and travel by boat, it's the best option for his family. And I'm sure he has things to do with Uncle Jared having a plantation on Jamaica, that he will find some way to ply the trade and make money. They were interrupted by Ulysses and Farquard Campbell. Farquard had hurried to reach them. There had been an accident at the sawmill. He'd come to ask Claire for her medicines that Jamie could use. He has concerns it would be too much for a lady to witness. The situation involved a white man and one of Jocasta's slaves. He calls it a matter of bloodshed. It is a matter of bloodshed, Joe. I do not know who, nor how, nor even how bad the injury may be. McNeil's boy came for me, but for the other, it is the law. And you're a judge, she burst out. For God's sakes, can you not do something? Her head moved jerkily, blind eyes trying to fix him, bend him to her will. No, he said sharply, and then more gently repeated, no. He lifted her hand from his sleeve and held it tightly. You know I cannot. If I could. If you could, you would not, she said bitterly. She pulled her hand out of his grasp and stood back, fists clenched at her sides. Go on, then. They've called you to be judge. Go and give them their judgment. She whirled on her heel and left the room, her skirts rustling with angry futility. Because Jocasta knows what it means, because bloodshed has occurred between a slave and a white man. He goes on to explain the law of the colony to Jamie. It is the law of this colony, sir, that if a Negro shall assault a white person, and in doing so, it is the law of this colony, sir, that if a Negro shall assault a white person, and in so doing cause blood to be shed, then he shall die for his crime. Such occurrences are most thankfully rare, but when they occur, he has to go, and he wants Jamie to go with him. He isn't sure of it, but he's been called to judge the situation and oversee the execution of the slave, if necessary. Your pardon, Mum. I know you're newly come here. You will find some of our ways difficult and even barbarous, but too right I find them barbarous. What kind of law is it that condemns a man? A slave. A man condemns him without a trial, without even an investigation. What sort of law is that? A bad one, madame, but it's still the law, and I am charged with its fulfillment. Mr. Fraser, are you ready? He clapped the hat on his head and turned to Jamie. Claire doesn't want Jamie to go in Jocasta's place, but he must. He feels he's already part of the situation, since the man in question is her property. And Claire insists on going too. She gets her physician's box, and off they go. Jamie must explain to another man that Claire has seen war, and if he is wanted, she comes too. As they continue to ride, McNeil offers up the full explanation. Told in brief spurts as we trotted, it was a simple story. The sawmill's overseer, Burns, had had an altercation with one of the turpentine slaves. This man, being armed with a large slash knife appropriate to his occupation, had attempted to settle the matter by removing Burns' head. Missing his aim, he had succeeded only in depriving the overseer of an ear. They then learn of a ghastly practice of nearby plantation owners sending their own slaves to watch an execution as a form of deterrent and behavior control. And here's Jamie's response. Indeed, I believe that the Crown's notion in executing my grandsire on Tower Hill after the Rising, very effective too. All my relations have been quite well behaved since. Oh, Jamie, tell him how you really feel. McNeil blames Jocasta for the situation because Burns is not fit to be the overseer. Campbell reminds him Hector hired him, not Jocasta. Further, how could she simply dismiss him, unable to run the operations herself since she's blind and a woman? That's 2 massive strikes against her. Blind might not be the biggest strike, it's her being a woman, after all. McNeil makes an offhand remark that Claire takes issue with. There's little worse than a willful woman, McNeil said, a trifle louder than strictly necessary. They've none to blame save themselves if harm comes to them. Whereas, I chipped in, leaning forward and raising my own voice, enough to be heard over the clop and creak of the horses, if harm comes to them because of some man, the satisfaction of blaming him will be adequate compensation? Jamie snorted briefly with amusement. Campbell cackled out loud and poked McNeil in the ribs with his crop. Got you there, Andrew, he said. Yeah, I don't think wisecracking some misogynistic baloney is what Claire will put up with at all. It didn't matter that Burns was terrible at the job. Regardless of why the slave drew his blood, he would die for it. Claire is outraged and wondering what Jamie will do. Would he stand by and allow the execution? What did he mean? He was already part of it. Claire is concerned with what he will or will not do. Clearly the other men believe it was his problem to handle. Claire knows what Jamie is made of. He's educated, cultured, and traveled, and he absolutely knows her thoughts on the matter. And when she catches a glimpse of his face, she is quite alarmed to discern he has no idea what he is going to do when they get to the sawmill. Jamie always has a plan, and for Claire to see that he doesn't have a plan is pretty unsettling for her. She kind of flies by the seat of her pants unless it's a medical matter, but Jamie has the ability to think down many avenues and options, and I think in his mind he can see a situation for the full sphere that it is, and then he can plot out a course and to see where everything will lead down the line. That sounds a lot like Diana Gabaldon's brain. As they rode, the landscape changed to that of a pine forest. Claire has the feeling of being submerged into the depths of ocean from the surface. She takes security knowing she has her doctor's box. She could perhaps repair wounds. As a note to the storytelling, Claire is brought out of her thoughts by voices that sound like angry bees. Diana Gabaldon often uses the imagery and example of bees and other parts of nature to relay what's happening in a scene. The sound of a gunshot causes them all to sprint toward the sawmill. She relates to the people in the area panicking like termites. This isn't enough to hold Claire's attention, though, when she sees a man hanging from a crane hoist by a huge... She's doing that laser focus thing. The men push their way to the platform where the injured overseer and slave were. Claire finds herself unable to move. The scene is chaotic and charged. Jamie has to threaten those surrounding the overseer to keep them calm. He has the slave brought down to the platform and taken off the hook. Claire's clinical senses kick in, and the rest of the scene is muted while she focuses on the injured slave. The man is alive. Claire runs her hands over him in assessment. She finds the hook missed perforating his lungs, diaphragm, abdominal aorta, and renal artery. It would be easy if you wanted to see what all those things were by just pulling up a chart. So it's pretty phenomenal knowing where everything is located, that he was not mortally injured. She vaguely hears the argument of men behind her. Jamie comes up beside her. She realizes the man's injuries may not be mortal. She is quite unsettled at this idea. An unsettling thought came to me. I might be able to keep this man alive. Likely not. In the wake of the thought came a flood of all the things that could go wrong. Hemorrhage when I removed the hook, being only the most immediate, internal bleeding, delayed shock, perforated intestine, peritonitis, and she had seen a man pierced at Preston Pans. The location of the wound very much like this one. He had received no treatment beyond a bandage wrapped around his body, and he had recovered. But there's still this argument that's going on. And she asked Jamie, if I save him, will they let him live? And Jamie is thinking of the possibilities, but the answer is no. They won't let him live. So Claire makes a choice because this man would not be allowed to live under any circumstances of the law. Jamie would defend her choices no matter what she decided to do, and she says to him, "Give me the third bottle from the left top row." I had 2 bottles of pure alcohol, another of brandy. And she poured a good dose of the brownish powdered root into the brandy and shook it briskly, then crawled to the man's head and pressed it to his lips. He swallowed once, twice. The muscles near his blanched mouth quivered. Drops of brandy ran across his skin. Once more a deep convulsive gulp, and then his straining neck relaxed, his head heavy on my arm. Well, what did Claire give this man? She poisoned him with something called aconite. It goes by several different names, and I did put a link in the show notes. And the symptoms that he experiences are similar to those he would experience if his injuries were indeed mortal. Like he would get numbness, tingling, nausea, epigastric pain, which is basically where your liver is on the upper right quadrant underneath your ribs, labored breathing, cold and clammy skin, feeble pulse, etc. So, this is a pretty good mask. If she's going to poison somebody to be humane, it's really going to be difficult for her to get caught. So is it a more humane death? I mean, Claire believes that he would stay conscious while he was feeling all these things. Could you do what she did? Remember the ill Scottish patient she helped die before she went on sabbatical in Boston? This is a tough one. I don't really believe in physician-assisted suicide as a point of ethics, because I believe that physicians are healers. But I think individual circumstances could cause a physician to make such a choice, because this man was not going to live no matter what she did. There was no way there could be a plan of escape. There was no way it was going to go without the justice of the laws that were on the current books. So as terrible as it is, I think what she did was right. She provided him a quick out. And there wouldn't have to be some big public execution. And Jamie clearly supported her choice. And is it any different than knowing that you are in mortal danger and you are going to die of ending your own life, so the enemy doesn't have the option of ending it for you? These are some pretty difficult ethical questions, and you're the only one who could answer it for yourself. I have been watching The Man in the High Tower on Amazon. I didn't watch it for a long time because, frankly, the content freaks me out. So I started watching it, and my husband and I can only watch a show or two at a time, and then we have to have a break because it messes with our heads so much. But in one scene, I won't give it away if you haven't watched it, one of the Nazi upper-ups high command guys, was fearing for his own family's life. And he was in a situation where it was kill or be killed. And if he didn't return alive, if the other person came back instead of him, his wife was to shoot their children and then shoot herself. That was the only way for them to be safe, was for their death to be in the humane and proper hands of their own mother, instead of taken by the man who potentially could kill him. Again, really difficult moral and ethical questions. I don't think there are sweeping answers, but if I were in that situation, I would much rather be the one have to kill my children than put them in further harm's way, knowing that they were probably going to be tormented and tortured by someone. Tough choices. I'm glad I don't have to make them. So we are seeing Claire battle her 20th century sensibilities here and her physician ethics. So that's a really difficult combination, and it's a struggle for her. But she's able to make the decisions, I think, better than a lot of people in that circumstance, just like a soldier would on the battlefield, etc. She can be very clear when she has to be. But she doesn't like slave ownership. She doesn't like the laws that make slaves partially human and not completely human. They're not men or women. They're slaves. It's really disturbing. And throughout this book, this content is going to be smacking us in the face. And they're good conversations to have. And this happens to be Black History Month in the United States. Be open-minded. Read things you've never read before. Watch things. Try and look at circumstances through the eyes of other people. Because it is very different. And the attitudes that began in the colonies with slavery in this country to build this country, they still remain in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, they become part of the fabric of how society works. And so we don't even see it. We don't even realize that we're participating in it. So we do have to be aware. And we have to be mindful and awake in our life and in our society and how we choose to see situations and whether we're going to stagnate or grow beyond them. Chapter 12, The Return of John Quincy Myers. Though upset by what happened at the sawmill, Aunt Jocasta decides the party must go on. Phaedra will make a repurposed gown for Claire. Remember Phaedra? She's the personal body servant of Jocasta. Between her and Ulysses, that's where Jocasta gets a lot of her information. And because the party's that day, there isn't any time for an absolute fresh gown to be made. And I did notate in the show notes that American Duchess has many resources if you're interested in 18th century colonial clothing and all other goods. So there is a link for you to click on, and they have many other links that you can go to as well. With Claire being shorter and more buxom than Jocasta, Jocasta wants the bodice slashed and filled with Valenciennes lace and green silk to show off Claire's bosom. And Claire remarks how Jocasta must remember color very well. "Oh, I remember this dress very well. A gentleman once told me I reminded him of Persephone in it. Springtime incarnate, he said." A faint smile of memory lit her face, and then was erased as she lifted her head toward me. And Jocasta wants to know what color Claire's hair is. And it turns into this conversation with Claire being uncomfortable when Phaedra and Joe discuss how she looks and her coloring. She feels like she's an object d'art. I disliked being discussed as though I were an object d'art, an object of art, and possibly a defective one at that, but swallowed my objections. Phaedra was shaking her head definitely. Oh, no, ma'am. She ain't washed out. She got them bones as make shadows and brown eyes, but don't be thinking they mud color. You recall the book you got, the one with the pictures of all them strange animals? If you mean accounts of an exploration of the Indian subcontinent, yes, I recall it. Ulysses read it to me only last month. You mean that Mrs. Fraser reminds you of one of those illustrations? Mm-hmm. She looks like that big cat. Like that there tiger looking out from the leaves. It's those whiskey-colored eyes that look very cat-like. Jamie may have the cat shape, but Claire has the cat color. That would be very odd to have people fussing over you like that. The repurposed dress fit Claire like a glove. She, of course, refused her hair to be rice-powdered and only wore the most modest of jewelry, much to Phage's annoyance. She came across Ulysses and caught him openly admiring her. She smiled back at him, and he is stunned and horrified at her notice. In this time, an African-American servant caught ogling or admiring one of the household could be punished severely. It took Claire a moment to realize why he ran off. It's so disturbing. I shudder at this country being built on slavery. And people having to fear every second, every facial expression, every thing that they might do being construed into something improper. Claire thinks he had become used to a blind mistress and no master. He forgot to keep his face blank. Claire is glad it was her he looked upon and not another woman. He is safe with her. Hearing footsteps, she looks up to see Jamie all rigged out in Highland glam. A Highlander in full regalia is an impressive sight. Any Highlander, no matter how old, ill-favored, or crabbed in appearance. A tall, straight-bodied, and by no means ill-favored Highlander in the prime of his life is breathtaking. He hadn't worn the kilt since Culloden, but his body had not forgotten the way of it. "Oh," I said. He saw me then, and white teeth flashed as he made me a leg, silver shoe buckles gleaming. He straightened and turned on his heel to set his plaid swinging. Then came down slowly, eyes fixed on my face. For a moment I saw him as he looked the morning I married him. The set of his tartan was nearly the same now as then. Black check on a crimson ground. Plaid caught at his shoulders with a silver brooch, dipping to the calf of a neat, stockinged leg. His linen was finer now, as was his coat. The dirk he wore at his waist had bands of gold across the haft. He looked like a man of worth. But the bold face above the lace was the same, older now, but wiser with it. Yet the tilt of his shining head and the set of the wide firm mouth, the slanted clear cat eyes that looked into my own were just the same. Here was a man who had always known his worth. That's such a great visage, isn't it? Jocasta had given him Hector Cameron's kilt set. Jamie seems troubled, but can't talk to Claire about it now. He wants her to be ready to make a distraction during the dinner if needed. Jamie leaves as he spies Jocasta. She greets Claire. Claire says Jamie has gone to meet the guests. And she's not lying. Ah, her hand tightened on my arm and she sighed somewhere between satisfaction and impatience. I'm not one to lament what cannot be mended, but I swear I should give one of my eyes could the sight of the other be restored long enough to see the lad in his plaidie this night. Oh, I bet he looks beautiful, and Jocasta knows it. Jocasta is dressed beautifully in a dark blue silk embroidered dress with dragonflies on it. I looked up the symbology of dragonflies, and there's a lot to it. I mean, I put the link in the show notes, but part of it has to do with changing things, positive attitude, making sure things happen, And I really wonder, I know dragonflies is big in the Outlander books, but I wonder if the dark blue silk has something to do with the traveler's aura color. Because remember, Claire is a blue. Everyone who can travel has a blue aura about them. So it makes me wonder if this was put in here for that reason. Or I could be reading way too much into it, like a nerd that I am. Ulysses comes to accompany Jocasta into the party. Claire follows, noticing part of the dinner fare as she goes. She dodged to avoid 2 kitchen boys bearing in the centerpiece a whole roasted boar, tusked, head intact, and fiercely glaring, succulent backside gleaming fatly, ready for the knife. It smelled divine. I smoothed my hair and prepared to meet Jocasta's guests, feeling rather as though I too were being presented on a silver platter with an apple in my mouth. And I dare say Jamie also is being presented this evening. And that is perhaps why he's so unsettled himself. The who's who of Cape Fear is present, a variety of Scots from the Isles to the Highlands. Jamie, however, is nowhere to be seen. Jocasta sends Ulysses to look for him. There's also a few notable non-Scots present as well, a Quaker named Herman Husband, a gentleman named Hunter, and that dandy Philip Wiley. Remember, he was at the dinner party the governor attended. So we meet again, Mrs. Fraser. I confess that I am ravished with enchantment to behold you again. What are you doing here? I said rather rudely. He grinned impudently. I was brought by mine host, the noble and puissant Mr. McNeil of Barra Meadows, from whom I have just purchased an excellent pair of greys. Speaking of which, wild horses would have proved insufficient to restrain me from attendance this evening, upon my hearing that this occasion is held in your honour. His eyes wandered slowly over me, with a detached air of connoisseur appreciating some rare work of art. Again, being treated like an objet d'art. May I observe, ma'am, how most becoming in that shade of green? I don't suppose I can stop you. To say nothing of the effect of candlelight upon your skin. Thy neck is as a tower of ivory, he quoted, drawing a thumb insinuatingly over my palm. Thine eyes like the fish pools in Heshbon. Thy nose is as the tower of Lebanon, which looketh toward Damascus, I said, with a pointed look at his aristocratically pronounced proboscis. A proboscis is a nose. So he's being a flirty McFlirtison with her. Now remember, Claire's used to 20th century men. The politics of dating and flirting are very different in 1767 than they are in 1967. So Claire has to watch herself here. This Wiley is wily. That's why he has that name, I think. That boy. Claire is most annoyed by his attentions. It turns out he is merely 25 years old. Claire tells him she is old enough to be his mother, but this doesn't bother him one whit. She makes sure Ulysses sits Philip by her at dinner. She's thinking she can use him as the distraction that Jamie might need. But I think Claire could be getting herself into hot water. Philip, again, is clearly smitten and flirting with her. Might he read her the wrong way, regardless of what she says to him? At the dinner, Claire is seated with Wiley and husband. They formed a small island of English in the midst of a sea of swirling Scots. Jamie shows up at the last moment. He's at the head of the table with Jocasta to his right. Claire is dying to know what's going on and is ready to stab Wiley if needed. Even so, the third course comes without issue. Wiley continues his flirtation by pressing his thigh to Claire's. This boy is over the top. It's an odd bit of conversation between Wiley and Herman's husband. Herman then further discusses a question Claire asked him prior to the interruption. "Thou asked of the regulators, Mrs. Fraser? I should recommend thy questions to Mr. Hunter, for if the regulators might be able to enjoy the benefits of leadership, it is to this gentleman that they look." Mr. Hunter bowed at the compliment. A tall, lantern-jawed individual, he was more plainly dressed than most of those in attendance, though not a Quaker. Claire has the governor's offer on her mind, and she's seeking intel on the back country, and the politics, and the dangers, because if Jamie takes that offer, these are the people they're going to be dealing with, and the situations. As the conversation is getting heated between Wiley and husband, Claire hears noises from outside. Then she sees a drunk, John Quincy Myers, trying to enter the room. Jamie needs a distraction, right? He leaned heavily upon the doorframe, surveying the assemblage through bloodshot eyes. His face was flushed, his breathing stertorous, and in one hand he held a long glass bottle. His eyes lit upon me, and his face contorted into a fearful grimace of gratification. "There you are," he said in tones of the deepest satisfaction. "Shed show. Duncan wouldn't have it. Said yes. Mrs. Clare said gotter be drunk afore she cuts me, so I'm drunk." Drunk. He paused, swaying dangerously, and raised his bottle high. "As a skunk," he ended triumphantly. He took a step into the room, fell flat on his face, and didn't move. Duncan appeared in the doorway, looking a good deal worse for wear himself. His shirt was ripped, his coat hung off his shoulder, and he had the beginnings of what looked like a black eye. He glanced down at the prostrate form at his feet, then looked apologetically at Jamie. "I did try to stop him, McDoo." Oh, this has to be the best party ever. I totally want to go to this. It's absolute hilarity. Then we get Jamie's response. "Well, you did say he must be unconscious." He bent over the mountain man and thumbed back an eyelid, showing a slice of blank white eyeball. "I'd say he's made a good job of it myself." "Yes, but I didn't mean dead drunk." I squatted by the insensible form and put a ginger 2 fingers over the carotid pulse. "Nice and strong. Still. Alcohol isn't a good anesthetic at all. It's a poison. It depresses the central nervous system. Put the shock of operating on top of alcohol intoxication, it could kill him easily." "No great loss," said someone among the guests, but this caustic opinion was drowned in a flood of reproachful shushing. "Shame to waste so much brandy." It was Philip Wiley. And then Wiley says, "We've heard a great deal of your skill, Mistress Fraser. Now's your chance of proving yourself before witnesses." And she tells him to bugger off. And he does. Oh, he's such a poof. It's hilarious. He's a dandy boy for sure. Myers had asked her to do it, but he's almost at the point of alcohol poisoning. But what timing indeed. Looking to Jamie for advice, he tells her she should do it. "Best do it, Sassenach. He may ne'er have either the courage or the money to get that drunk again." So, Claire decides to do the surgery. And this is like being in an operating theater with every person watching through the windows possible. And Jamie did want a distraction. And this is an amazing and unexpected one for certain. So the salon is being used as her operating theater. Relieved of his nether garb, Myers lay tastefully displayed on the mahogany table, boneless as a roasted pheasant, and nearly as ornamental. In lieu of platter, he lay upon a stable blanket, a gaudy centerpiece in his quilled shirt and bear's claw necklace, surrounded by a garnish of bottles, rags, and bandages. So again, like the suckling pig, he's also being presented upon a platter. Claire didn't have time to change, so she donned a butchering apron to cover her dress, and Phage pinned up her sleeves. An exorbitant number of candles are used to light the space. She proceeds to douse his genitals with several shillings worth of brandy. Expensive way to kill lice, someone remarked critically behind me, observing the hasty exodus of miscellaneous small forms of life in the wake of the flood. Ah, but they'll die happy, said a voice I recognized as Ian's. I brought you your wee box, Auntie. He set the surgical chest by her elbow and opened it. So we're going to have some interesting operating support here. She sterilizes her blade with alcohol first, while two strong men were told to hold John's legs. Farquard Campbell and Andrew McNeil are holding the arms. Young Ian oversees additional candlelight, and Jamie is the anesthetist ready to pour whiskey into John as needed. And Claire is poised to begin. Myers' penis, embarrassed by the attention, had already retreated, peeping shyly out of the bushes. With the patient's long legs raised and spread, Ulysses himself delicately cupping the baggy scrotum away, the hernia clearly revealed, a smooth swelling the size of a hen's egg, its curve a deep purple where it pressed against the taut inguinal skin. Jesus Lord, said one of the drivers, eyes bulging at the sight. It's true, he's got 3 balls. And I giggle, and in the book, a collective gasp and giggle ensued from the spectators. Seriously, this has to be the best party ever in Cape Fear. Claire does one final sterilization of her scalpel and makes the cut. She sees the intestine bulging through the tear in the muscle layer. She dips her hands in the disinfecting bowl, then presses the loop upward. Jamie administers whiskey as Myers threatens to wake. Claire visualizes the muscle layer and becomes one with Myers' body. She tunes in to his rhythms and tunes out everything around her. I could feel the movement of his intestines as he breathed, the dark, wet warmth of his body surrounding my gloveless fingers, and that strange one-sided intimacy that is a surgeon's realm. I closed my eyes and let all sense of urgency, all consciousness of the watching crowd drop away. I breathed in slowly, matching my rhythm to the audible snores. Above the reek of brandy and the faintly nauseating aromas of food, I could smell the earthly odors of his body, stale sweat, grimed skin, a small tang of urine, and the copper scent of blood. To another, they would have been offensive, but not to me, not now. The body was. No good, no bad, it simply was. I knew it. Now it was mine. They were all mine, the unconscious body in my hands, its secrets open to me, the men who held it, their eyes on me. It didn't always matter. It didn't always happen, but when it did, the sensation was unforgettable. A synthesis of minds into a single organism, and as I took control of this organism, I became part of it and lost myself. Time stopped. I was acutely aware of each movement, each breath, the tug and pull of the catgut sutures as I tightened the inguinal ring, but my hands did not belong to me. My voice was high and clear, giving directions instantly obeyed, and somewhere far away a small watcher in my brain observed the progress of the operation with a remote sense of interest. Then it was done, and time began again. I find that to be so eloquent and beautiful, and Diana describes it with utter perfection. And why do I say that? Well, as a midwife, I have something very similar happen when a baby is imminently going to be born. I take notice of nothing around me and focus purely on the mother's body and the descending baby. It's not until I've placed the baby in the mother's arms do I notice anything else around me. I have looked up to see 10 other people in the birthing space and hadn't noticed them enter. It's like being in a bubble that only encompasses the mother, baby, and me. It's an intense connection and focus. unless you've experienced something like this, it's so difficult to explain. And I love how Diana puts it. You get into this space. It's almost like you're in your own part of time. And you can hear nothing. You can see nothing. You experience nothing outside of what you're doing at that very moment. There are times I have to help a baby breathe after delivery. And the whole process often only takes 15 seconds, max, before I'm putting the baby into mama's arms. And it feels like it's been 5 minutes. But I have a watch on and I have somebody else looking at the time to see how long it took. And it's this strange zone, and it's a very intimate space to be in. And if you've never experienced it, it's really, really very amazing and awesome. And it's unlike anything else you'll experience. So, as somebody who takes care of mamas and babies, I have a little taste of what Claire does. As she finishes, the spectators erupt in applause. So Claire turns and gives a deep curtsy. I can see her doing that with flourish. Over the next hour, Claire is toasted multiple times and needs to escape the throng. She heads upstairs to check on her patient. She stops and looks down on the party. I paused on the gallery, clinging to the banister while I steadied myself. There was a loud hum of conversation and laughter from below. The party was still going strong, but had dissolved into small groups scattered over the parquet of the foyer and salon. From this perspective, it looked like a honeycomb, fuzzy-wigged heads and gauze-winged dresses bobbing to and fro across the six-sided tiles, buzzing busily over glasses filled with the nectar of brandywine and porter. If Jamie had wanted a diversion, I thought muzzily, he couldn't have asked for better. Whatever had been going to happen had been effectively forestalled. But what was it, and for how long could it be prevented? I shook my head to clear it with indifferent results and went to see my patient. Oh, poor Claire. She's buzzed off of surgery, off the adrenaline that goes with it, the experience of her own, and now off of lots of toasts and booze. Again, she sees nature in the actions of humans. Her connection to the natural world is absolute. And I do agree with her. It was a momentous distraction, even though it likely won't completely put off whatever Jamie is avoiding in this moment. Betty, one of the house slaves, had been sitting with the comatose Myers. Claire can see his pulse and notes he is cool and not fevered. Jamie asks how Myers is. He's fine. You couldn't kill him with a cannon like you. Indestructible, she says. Jamie kissed the top of my head, smoothing back a few curls that had escaped from their dressing during the operation. You did well, Sassenach. Very well, bonny lassie. As capable as Claire is, I don't recommend doing drunk rounds on patients. She notices the smell and feel of Jamie, and he asks her to meet him outside, and to take care not to break her neck on the stairs. And she says she feels more drunk now than she did before. So that's the end of this chapter. John Quincy Myers was the perfect distraction. He's going to undoubtedly have a hangover to end all hangovers, I think, but his hernia will be perfectly mended. This surgery scene is one of my top 10 favorites from all the books. I wish to be at that dinner party. What is Jamie trying to escape? Jocasta should be happy her party will be the talk of Cape Fear for weeks. Claire's reputation as a physician will be well known by all in the area. We met a new character, Betty. I wonder when we will see her next. What will come of Philip Wiley's flirtation? What about the regulators and the backcountry being in political unrest? Is Jamie still considering the governor's offer? By the way, YouTube has several hernia surgeries for your viewing. I couldn't find one that matched with how Claire did it. The rest all went through the lower abdomen instead of going through the scrotum, even though they were all inguinal hernias and some were down into the scrotum. They just pulled the intestine back up. So I watched, 5 or 6 hernia surgeries because that's the kind of nerd I am. And I quite enjoyed them. I find it fascinating. There's a lot of moving parts right now. The other thing is that Claire euthanized somebody to keep him from being publicly executed and from giving Burns any pleasure in this man dying. But the law was fulfilled. The man did not live. So I'd say Claire kept the spirit of the law alive. So there's that. There's this thing hanging over Jamie. Jocasta gave Jamie Hector's full plaid. His full kilt set. That is a big deal. It'll be such an interesting progression from here. Next podcast, we'll be doing chapter 13. And remember, you can participate in the podcast in a variety of ways. You can send me an email to contact@adramaofoutlander.com. You may call the listener line and leave a voicemail, 719-425-9444. If you're reading ahead, you can leave comments for any part of the book, too, whenever you want. And please join the weekly Twitter chat Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, using the hashtag ADOO. The other way that you can participate is go to Facebook. Like the page. It's a very large page, but it's primarily run by me. Anything that I post gets seen, but anything anybody else posts may or may not get seen. So in order to have a community feel, please go to the groups. It's a Dram of Outlander, and ask to join. There are 3 simple questions for you to answer, so I know you're not a troll or a bot or something in between. But it's a fun community, and we're almost at 1,000 people in there now, and it's really about you posting things and talking to each other and asking questions, and it doesn't just have to be about Outlander. But the Dram of Outlander community is a really nice place to be. People are kind, and they're generous and thoughtful, and I rarely have to moderate. I hate having to moderate adult people. I think that kindness counts, and we don't have to agree or see things from the same vantage point or perspective to have a great community. We can disagree on things and argue even about certain points and yet still get along. That is the flavor of life right there. How we all interpret the words in these books, the scenes, the characters, the drive behind the books even, and the essence of them, they're all going to be filtered through our own experiences, our own perceptions, our own lives, and what we know. And the things that call to us particularly might be different than another reader who's just as in love with these books. So I love that. I like really good spirited conversation. Diana Gabaldon recently posted that these books ultimately are Jamie's story. And once Claire gets to the 18th century, it really does revolve around their life together, but it's his family. It's about Scotland. It's about his history. I can see at the very base of it that ultimately it's Jamie's stories as told by Claire, but I see it as their story. I don't think Jamie is a full character, a full person, because these characters read real without Claire. He doesn't do well without her. He's not complete, and just like she isn't. They survive. They pretty much do okay, but they don't always make the right choices when they're not together. It's very hard for them not to be together. And I think that there's a lot that Claire does without him. So that's what Diana says, and that's her intention, and that's her motivation. But I also firmly believe that once an author releases their work into the public and people start consuming it, they're going to have their own perceptions and their own reality surrounding what the books mean. And Diana even says that readers have given her really good reasons why it's Claire's story or why it's their story and not Jamie's story. And she says they're valid, and I agree with that. But it's fun to explore why we have a differing perception from the author herself and why we believe it to be something different than the author herself. It's taken on a life of its own and entered into our psyche and become part of our fabric of who we are. And I think it's really fun that I talk about books every week. I talk about somebody else's writing. I find it fascinating and intelligent and interesting. And thank you for listening, because I think you do too, or you wouldn't listen and you wouldn't interact with me. Oh, you can also go and follow Twitter, which is Dram of Outlander without the A. And Instagram is also Dram of Outlander. And I try to put photographs of Scotland and of things that are related to Outlander, not just Outlander. And the best ways that you can support the podcast are to share them with other people, interact on social media, come out to the chat, put in your own thoughts and comments. I want to hear from you. I'm not the alpha. I'm not right. I'm simply somebody who sits down and researches every week and wants to talk about something I love to pieces. One of my sons told me I'm addicted to books. There's way worse things to be addicted to. Keeps my brain stimulated. Keeps me learning and thinking and exploring. So I will take that as a positive addiction. Thank you very much. And the other way that you can support the podcast is financially. You can go to patreon.com/adramofOutlander, and you can offer as little as $1 a month. I'm a solo podcaster. Everything comes from me, and I appreciate every dollar that comes to help me support the podcast and to make sure that I give you a good product. So I thank you for listening. And one of the comments that I got this week was that somebody really appreciated how I put together the podcast, because it stays true to the story, but I'm able to add my own context to it and my own thoughts as well. So thank you for that. And I appreciate you all so much for listening, because if it wasn't for you, I'd be simply talking to myself. So until next time, Slán je va.